Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heman, Senior Research Associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities, and I'm thrilled to welcome you in today's webinar on a world of equals, fulfilling the global goal of inclusive communities by empowering minorities. SARIM is a dedicated research institute with a mission to promote inclusivity, diversity, and social justice in South Asia and beyond. We believe that every voice should be heard regardless of race, religion, caste, or ethnicity. Through webinars, interviews, and research advocacy and partnership, we work towards creating a world where every individual enjoys equal rights and opportunities. In a world marked by diversity, achieving inclusive communities is not just an inspiration or aspiration but a fundamental necessity. Today we will explore how we can fulfill the global goal of reducing inequalities by empowering minorities. Our panel of speakers will shed light on the various aspects of this vital topic. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers: Dr. Georgina Jardim from UK, Mr. Anubhav Singh from India, and Ms. Reeta Pariyar from Nepal. It's now my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Georgina Jardim. Dr. Jardim holds a diverse and rich academic background. Her journey in academia and her dedication to research led her to explore the intersection of religion and women studies. Dr. Jardim is a research associate at University of Gloucestershire, where she has focused her scholarly efforts on the study of female characters in the Quran from a unique Christian perspective. Her research interests extend to the fascinating realm of reading Quran and Bible together, bridging the divides between faiths and understanding the role of religion in shaping women's experiences. Her passion for fostering interfaith dialogue and understanding is truly commendable. Beyond academia, Dr. Jardim is dedicated to facilitating deeper engagement between everyday Christians and Muslims. She also believes in using the art as a power medium for fostering public engagement with faith. As an example of this commitment, she has collaborated on projects such as Women at the Well. Over to you, Dr. Georgina.
Thank you very much for your generous introduction. And it's very good to see, even in this small community, that we are modeling how to be inclusive across the globe. So I'd like to pose a few questions for our title for today's webinar. It speaks of fulfilling the global goal of inclusive communities. And although it expresses the hope of equality, the reality for many in our world today is that they are unsure wherein to place their hope for equality. To what extent does the world really have the goal of inclusive communities now? In my lifetime, it felt like there was such a moment in the early 1990s when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union came to an end, West and East Germany united, apartheid in South Africa was dismantled, and the peace process in Ireland could make progress. 1993 even saw the signing of a peace treaty between Israel and Palestine that became known as the Oslo Accords. However, when we look around our world today, the global scene seems to be pointing in the opposite direction. We more often see people dividing along lines of global discourses, some of which are geopolitics of the West and the rest, or the so-called culture wars that create groups within groups. For each group, the challenge seems to be how to be heard and how to claim respect from others, rather than asking how to adapt to the broader cultural landscape while preserving and valuing what makes it different. And the question for the broader cultural landscape is whether its legal and institutional structures promote equality or hierarchy, with many authoritarian movements now actively promoting hierarchy of communities. So I think the main challenge for inclusive communities is how to make these global goals local. Do local communities really value equality between people, or do they seek power over each other? How do we translate the global goal of equality to make it relevant for local conditions? And how do local communities interpret global goals to inspire attitudes and actions in the local community? Where there are negative views of others that work against empowerment of minorities, are there narratives or histories to draw on that show them in a different light? Are there spaces like community centers, museums, or festivals that celebrate the contributions of everyone in an inclusive community? I can say that here in my local community, there are opportunities for communities to come together for inclusive activities. Of course, it does depend on individuals and groups to participate, and not all people want to do that. So we need to keep working to make inclusion a reality. So here are meetings for peace and understanding. There are opportunities for crafts, for sharing food and mutual celebration. There are public spaces like museums or street festivals, open religious centers during national events or exhibitions that are open to all. And more fundamentally, here in Britain, there is healthcare for all in the national health system. So for us to learn from these examples, we need to ask, how did these inclusive communities form? How did they come about in the first place? And one of the foundations, there are several, but I would just want to point out one today, is the narratives that are part of the community's identity. Narratives that are taught in schools and community groups, and that shape a community's understanding of itself. One such narrative that I see represented often is the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's a story told by Jesus in the Gospels to ask people how they relate to each other in an inclusive community, and how are we to treat each other. The Samaritan, who is normally an outsider, sees an injured person, binds his wounds, and takes him to be cared for, paying his treatment in full. In the story, 3 leaders in the community who are related to the injured person pass him by. The question is then asked, who was the injured man's neighbor? The Samaritan, who is the outsider in social and cultural terms, but who had cared for him, or the 3 leaders who are socially and culturally related and therefore his equals, but they had ignored his needs. The story asks the question of the local individual and the local group. Who is your neighbor? And here it has become a metaphor for action in the community. There are charities inspired by the story or named after the Samaritan. For instance, the Samaritans is a charity that helps to prevent suicide. There are others that provide food or funding or medical care to those in need. And the story is such an integral part of the community here that you can be called a good Samaritan by anyone in the street, regardless of whether you hold a religious identity or not. Such inclusive communities are the result of long-standing commitments and a previous generation that valued these ways of engagement. So it is incumbent on new generations to keep these movements going, to update the activities in innovative ways, and to retell the narratives that made inclusive communities. So on this International Day of Peace, One of the things we can do is to retrieve our narratives of inclusive communities, to remind us and to inspire us towards a world of equals. And I hope we can do that this year.
It's an honor to listen, Dr. Jardim. No doubt your expertise and dedication to bridging religious divides and advancing the cause of women in faith communities are truly inspiring for many women out there. Thank you for sharing your insights and speaking your mind and heart out loud. I have privilege of welcoming Miss Reeta Pariyar. Reeta is a Dalit human rights activist who has been a relentless advocate for the rights of Dalit and minorities in Nepal. Reeta has dedicated herself to a cause of combating casteism and raising awareness and its implications. She has initiated online campaigns and discussion aimed at eliminating this deeply rooted social issue. Beyond her activism, Reeta Pariyar is an emerging social political leader and a social entrepreneur seeking meaningful change in Nepal. Her commitment to social justice is evident in her tireless efforts. Rita's work extends to public awareness initiatives that shine a light on the challenges faced by Dalits and minorities. Her contribution to creating more equitable society are commendable and reflect her commitment to making a positive impact. Ms. Pariyar, please go ahead and tell us what you have to say about this matter.
Thank you so much. Namaskar and good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry I got late because we have a very heavily rain here and there's a Wi-Fi problems at the same time. And thank you so much, Doctor. I heard your. I could not able to hear all your speech, but I will listen the recording one later. Um, today's topic was is old of equals fulfilling the global goals of inclusive community by empowering minorities. Uh, they say the world is unfair and there's always injustice and there's always inequality. But like you and then doctors and other peoples like us, we are in a dot in the world. So we're trying to connect these dots so that we can bring the change in the place where we are and the place we live in this earth, where we can see one day all the human get the same equality, same rights, and live as a human as others. Basically, what I have to say from my part of the world is we have many issues in part of my place where I live in Nepal. Like in Nepal, there's a many issues, but there's one issue is a casteism issues. So if I go deep enough, the casteism issues it's a very huge. We need another web seminar, but I will tell you the briefly that we have like different caste, but then one touchability, the other is untouchability. So depends on the so-called higher caste. Don't even touch the lower caste for people. So it just even in a human, they have a problem that one person cannot touch the other person. So that means already the lower caste person has got so much problem because he or she cannot get into the good education, cannot take a participant in a bureaucracy, cannot take a participant in a politics, and there's a cannot do the business. Obviously they are already poor because the education is a fundamental rights and fundamental things to get aware of everything what humans should get in their life. If you do not know the what is your right, then obviously you don't know how to ask the rights. So to know your rights, first you have to be educated. So the education is all first fundamental thing, so which we already lacking. There's a lot of Dalits still cannot go to the schools. They have no access of clean water, no access of the healthcare, and obviously they already like in a backward sites compared to other people. So it's everywhere. This happened in America, Europe, and other part of the Asia too. Because obviously the richer go get them all the facility than the poor people. And over that, we have this casteism issues. Because of that, the many people still don't have access to get the position where they're supposed to get. And the one person by birth, their surname, because of their surname, he or she already, some is higher caste, this one is a lower caste. So lower caste person need time to prove them they are a human. Just to prove the human, they have, they cannot get the time to focus their own quality, what they are good at it, because everybody born with the one quality. So they cannot focus in their quality. They always laid back from the others. Even the Muslim community, we have very minorities here. They have a problem with the religious issues because there's more Hindu overruled here. So there's other indigenous people has the same problem because they lives in a more far side of the close to the nature, so they don't get the same facility as other people does, so-called higher caste. So everywhere in the world, this is the major problem right now, I think, in the world. So what we want to try to get these people into the mainstream, like you and me, they can come to this kind of stage and they can have their own voice. For that, they need to get education. About me, I am from the same background, but I'm a very fighter and a rebellious person. I have been through a lot of struggle, but then again, I got the opportunity to get the education. So then once I know the education, then I know what is my right, and I know I should get the same opportunity as everyone else in this nation, or all over the world as citizenship of the human. So that, like, I am advocating about the people who has not got the voice, so I am trying to be a voice of the people, Dalit and women, and mostly I take these two topic, but the overall I speak for other issues at the same time, whatever it may comes, if I have to give a voice. But what I am thinking is just every nation has to come up with the certain law, certain rules and regulation to bring all those people in a same ground, by giving them education, skill trainings, by giving them economic opportunity. For example, if somebody can they stitch the cloth, they can, government or local government can help them a certain amount of money, so they can open up their own small business. Like some people can cook, like they can have a restaurants. Some people can make ornaments. They can have a jewelry shop. Like it's kind of many others, the small, even the venture. So the local government can give them certain economic support so they can get into the main system. Health and education, they should get the opportunity of getting health care. Because to be healthy, to get the education, and first you have to be healthy enough to. So even now we have a federalism system in every part of the world. So the local government has the same power as the central government these days. So local government should give those people opportunity, so who has a lack of this education and health care. So bring them in a different workshop, how to be clean, how to live a clean life, and then education, who has not got education access, so they should help them, those people. And criminal justification, justice, as well as the so-called higher caste has always pressed to the lower caste, and then the Hindu suppress the Muslims and other issues. Like, so when they got the injustice, we have many accident happens, because some people get beaten up when they try to get into the public place, like temples, some paddy palace. So they get beaten up. But when they go to complain the police, and they don't take their complaint, so they don't get a justice. So this kind of criminal things, they should get justice, who is suppressed by the system and the so-called higher caste in a society. So the criminal justification has to be right for them. The civic engagement, mostly those people never get a chance to get into the platform, like this platform. We have this small, it seems a small amount of people we are talking, but our voice is goes to all over the world. But these people should get the opportunity, this platform, and then like every nation, Pakistan, India, Nepal, America, Europe, you take a name. So these people should get engagement, their local level, so that they come to know what is happening. So what is the world goes? So how this the system works? How people get aware of all these things, knowing why they feel always left out because we not participate, don't participate them in this kind of the engagement or any other social engagement. Like here we have a festival going on here, like a women's festival. So some women have a lot of money and they wear the good ornaments, good clothes, and those people don't have a money, they don't wear the nice clothes, and they obviously look different than the one that who has everything. So, but what I'm trying to do through, I have a small foundation. So what I did, my foundation is a Reeta Foundation, but it's a right intervention team of Asia. That's the full meaning of my foundation. So what I did is in my village, I told them that, look, whatever you have, you come with that same clothes, but you just wash them and make them clean. Come. So what I'm trying to teach them is that we should celebrate the festivals, but it should not be the commercialized. It should not be the marketing things that you should spend so much money to look good, to have a good time. So I'm trying to give them insightful thoughts, bringing them, and then so I invited some of the wealthy people, and then most of them are the poor women. So I try to collaborate with each other. So they laugh, they dance. That's how that inclusion is very, very important to empower the minorities community. So that's what I think, like always, wherever what we can do from our own side, like I am this part of the world. So I try always, even I don't get a lot of opportunity to be in the main forum of the system, but I fight for that. But what I can do for others, so I try to always inclusion. What we do mostly sometimes, okay, these people are in suppression, minority people, we have to empower them, we have to uplift them. You know what we do? We do the huge mistake is we only teach them how to empower, so we don't include the other people who wants to give them the freedom. There's always two people bring the change in society. One that who wants to give a freedom to others, the one who seek for a freedom. So both has to be together to bring the change. So they will realize, oh, I am the one that who getting all the privilege, so-called the elite people. So the poor people even thinks that, oh, we all are the same. Actually, there is no much difference. So we have to make them feeling is the very important things that more than education, that how you feel, what you feel about yourself. So first, they have to feel their worth, because they are human and they are actually as equal as everybody else. They may look a different color, different height, different caste, different nationalities, but at the end, we all are a human. There's no difference in between human. If we can put the thoughts in their mind, and that is how some point we can bring the change in a society. Like you and I, we are dot in the world, as I already mentioned. So we can connect it as a line and a circle. So we can frequently talk about, exchange your circumstances and your atmosphere, what is there, your side of the world. So what is my side of the world? So this is how we can communicate. Communication is the key of everything. So this is how we can bring the change in the world and in our society. That's what I think. And then I guess I won't take a long time, but if you have any inquiries and question answer session, then I'll come to you. Thank you so much.
Ms. Pariyar, we understand the vulnerabilities that are faced by Dalits in Nepal and in the world. We appreciate the work you are doing and thank you, and it was pleasure hearing your thoughts. Now moving forward, allow me to introduce speaker Anubhav Singh, a dedicated Dalit activist and independent researcher based in USA, hailing from India. Anubhav's work has contributed significantly to the discourse of minority and social justice. Please, Anubhav, shed some light on this matter.
Thank you so much, Heman. and we are here to talk about a topic which is very, very pertinent in today's era, a world of equals, advancing global goals for inclusive communities by empowering minority groups. Um, as I understand, the idea of equality in this century would have to begin with the examination of the idea of what we understand by democracy. Um, of course, as we are aware that the idea of democracy or the very concept of democracy has come under attack, particularly in the last decade, almost 2014 onwards, with the emergence of right-wing movements across the world, particularly in America, significantly in India more so, and of course, in some countries in Europe and also in South America. In 1947, when the Constitution of India was being enacted and India had recently become independent, the person who was responsible for the drafting of this constitution, that is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, in a speech in 1949, came up with three very pertinent warnings about how, or rather the path that this new Indian democracy could take in the aftermath of decolonization. And he said, will Indians place the country above their creed, or will they place creed above country? I do not know. But this much is certain, that if the parties place creed above country, our independence will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably be lost forever. There is a danger of democracy giving place to dictatorship. It is quite possible for this newborn democracy to retain its form, but give place to dictatorship in fact. If there is a landslide, the danger of the second possibility becoming actuality is much greater. For in India, bhakti, or what may be called the path of devotion or hero worship, plays a part in its politics unequaled in magnitude by the part it plays in the politics compared to any other country. Bhakti in religion may be a road to the salvation of the soul. Bhakti in politics or hero worship is a sure road to degradation and to eventual dictatorship. The third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy. We must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is a complete absence of two things in Indian society, and one of these is equality. On the social plane, we have in India a society based on the principle of graded inequality, which we have a society in which there are some who have immense wealth as against many who live in abject poverty. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? So, three very pertinent warnings which are very applicable to any structure of democracy today across the world, as I see it. Whether we talk of Western democracy, that is, we talk of democracy in the West, or the idea of Western democracy, which together with the idea of capitalism, has held almost unchallenged political sway, particularly in the aftermath of the neoliberal paradigm of governance, which was enacted and adopted by majority of countries in the 1990s. This contradiction that Ambedkar talks about between one value, one vote, or between political democracy and social democracy, actually lies at the heart of the problem of democracy when it comes to the rights of those who are left behind. That is, of course, the marginalized, the minorities, as we call them. In the context of South Asia, we Hindus in Pakistan, Muslims in India, Dalits across South Asia, Christians, and other ethnic groups. Has South Asia, or in particular, if I were to talk of India, been able to resolve this contradiction to some extent between social and political democracy? I mean, the answer is a rather complex one, because with the advent of positive discrimination, that is the reservation system which was put in place, the backward castes or the backward classes and Dalits definitely seem to have improved their access to social goods and services, and of course to political power. And there has been the emergence of a new middle class within these very castes. However, what has been almost paradoxical has been the support that marginalized classes in India and indeed across the world, when we talk of even the white working class in America, for example, in Trump's case, that is the support that these marginalized groups have provided to right-wing authoritarian movements. And indeed, that is a contradiction that needs to be studied and talked about as to why that has happened. Has it happened particularly, with the decline of labor movements across the world, particularly the union movement and the left movements? Or we would say that there is a sort of a cultural propensity to support right-wing movements. When I was at Harvard, I took a course. It was a political economy of globalization, which was taught by Professor Danny Roderick. And, one of his arguments, of course, was that the support for right-wing movements, particularly in America and Europe, emerged from those very classes which had lost out in this idea of globalization. People who had been left behind. If we talk of, let's say, mobilization of labor as compared to the mobilization of capital, we would see that capital is way and far more mobile than compared to the mobility of labor. And when we talk of the labor classes, we are majorly talking about the people who have been left behind. That is the racial minorities or the religious minorities or ethnic minorities or caste minorities across the world. And indeed, up to certain extent, that phenomena is also quite visible when we see that it was actually the white working class which, where Trump enjoyed a substantial support, a substantial base, which indeed has also happened in different countries, particularly in India, where we see that there has been a rising support for BJP's politics of Hindutva, which is nothing but actually the imposition of upper caste hegemony. And paradoxically, the support has come, apart from, of course, that it's the main support coming from what we call the Savarnas or the upper caste. The support has also started to emerge, particularly from 2014 onwards, among the Dalits, the Adivasis, that is the tribals, and of course, and even in certain sections of the Muslims. I mean, as we talk about, there is almost a 20% support for Narendra Modi, electoral support, as far as the electoral population of the Muslim minority in India is concerned. John Draw, for example, is aptly termed it as a revolt of the upper caste against, India's democracy. But what then explains this rising support amongst those very people who would be exploited by this very system? And one of them, of course, in my view, is that the focus of left movements across the world, or has been more focused on the idea of identity, and less focused on the emergence of a new middle class within the very same marginalized identities, and I'd say where this emergent middle class within these marginalized identities have economic interests which are almost in alignment with that of the neoliberal paradigm. So it is not actually difficult to understand that, that in the aftermath of positive discrimination or the reservation system which was implemented in India, that there is, of course, that as different sections or different castes which had been left behind gained access to goods and services which they have been deprived of earlier, and as they emerged as a political bloc, it had become essential for the neoliberal system to not just co-opt the elites of this of these classes, but also to give them a partake or let them partake in the political power which hitherto had been denied to these castes and classes, and which until at least 2008 worked quite well. 2008 was a time where the Bahujan Samaj Party came into power in UP, and on its own, and was able to form a government without the support of any of the other parties, which was indeed, some called it a miracle of Indian democracy. Some called it that it was the second democratic upsurge in Indian democracy. But I'd say that the warning bells were there, because after 5 years of the BSP government and almost a decade of the UPA government, there was hardly any improvement which was noticed in the condition of the working classes, particularly in the in the second term of the UPA government. We saw an almost constant assault on the idea of labor protection, environmental protection, and India's whatever remains of India's social welfare system, to the point that John Raes, in one of his articles, called India as the world champion of social underspending. So, people who had been left behind, that is now the working classes of the lower castes or the marginalized castes or marginalized groups, which felt that they had been left behind, found themselves turning away from this supposed idea of neoliberal paradigm which was being perpetrated or played out in the idea in the name of left movements. A systematic assault on the idea of labor protection, for example, meant that the decline of trade unions, which until then, or until at least late 90s or early 2000s, had been able to intercede on behalf of the working classes, particularly the lower caste working classes, and had been able to a certain degree secure some of their rights, particularly that is whatever little improvement was made in their social in the idea of their social or economic capital, was almost assaulted and I'd say completely dispensed with. And as we see that the union movement in India has started to decline, One. Secondly, because of globalization, as India transitioned almost directly from the primary to the tertiary sector and skipped, the secondary sector without adding any form of, skilled labor, we see that the people who were able to pass through the cracks which had until then existed within the social and political crevices in Indian society were the ones who had, who not only turned away from erstwhile political parties who until then had been, been political in their name, but from them we see that they turn over almost completely to this idea of right-wing nationalism or Hindutva, because in this almost vacuum which was created in the absence of social movements, particularly the labor movement, stepped in what we call the Hindutva organizations, or particularly the RSS, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and the Bajrang Dal. So this idea, which until now, that is that of the Indian democracy, if you go through the directive principles of Indian democracy, we would find that there is a significant portion of it which is actually devoted to the idea of securing the rights of laborers and equal pay for equal work, and securing their health. The health of the working class. I mean, such ideas were almost laid to rest under this idea of the neoliberal paradigm, which was adopted by the Indian state, and even globally. I mean, if we look at what was happening in UK at this time, or what was happening in the US as well, we time and time again we come across the same idea that people who were falling through the cracks of globalization, or because of these economic policies which are being implemented across the world, particularly in the aftermath of the recession which hit the world in 2008. There was hardly any attention which was paid to making either one, the labor more mobile, to cut down on the hegemony of global finance capital, which, as I see it and as has been pointed out by many commentators and academics, also strengthened these right-wing movements. I mean, if we see today, the majority of the capitalist class, whether it be in India or we see it in America, is actually in alignment with the goals of neoliberal policy. And if that neoliberal policy is strengthened and hastened by the right-wing movement, then the global finance capital actually has no qualms in aligning with the idea of authoritarian neoliberalism, and which is indeed what we have witnessed across the world. So unless and until we pay attention to how the idea of democracy is being challenged, changed, and altered by global finance and neoliberalism, we will not be able to do justice in resolving this knot which still exists between social and political democracy. Because when we talk of social democracy, it should not just be based on the idea of identity. Of course, the idea of identity is important, but one should not discount the emergence of class within these very identities, particularly the marginalized identities that we talk about. In fact, if we talk of the Black Lives Matter movement, or particularly racial justice movement, we would have someone like Du Bois, during the time, roughly at the same time as Ambedkar, arguing that and talking about why was it that the white working class would not join hands with the black working class when it came to their own interests. And he came up with this idea of the wages of whiteness, that that in order to maintain this racial supremacy, it was absolutely necessary to provide certain kinds of benefits to the white working classes, which was, whether be it access to certain kinds of services, certain privileged democratic ideals or rights, which theoretically were available to everyone else, but in practice were only available to the privileged white upper white middle class and elites, and let them have a certain stake in that in those privileges, just so that the working class would not join hands. So if we look at what has been happening now in India, we would see that the very same existing crevices, particularly social crevices, have been exploited by the powers that be, whether they be along ethnic lines, whether they be along caste lines, whether they be along communal lines, or rather religious lines, that where the elites of each of these identities have been co-opted or appropriated, and the working class of these identities have actually been the one who have suffered the most. And and we must pay attention that it's not just in India but across the world that right-wing authoritarian movements have almost become adept and an expert in channelizing and furthering their agenda by exploiting the existing social crevices which exist within the society, and trying to address those crevices economically through economic policies will go a long way in cementing some of these social divides that we see have been at least constantly emergent and almost very powerfully emergent across the world. And until and unless that happens, it would be very difficult for the idea of democracy to survive as it is meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Anubhav, for speaking your mind out loud and giving us the global as well as theoretical perspective of minorities and Dalits, not just in India but beyond South Asia. It was quite insightful and providing us with facts and figures, and it's always pleasure to listening you. Now moving forward, I would like to extend an invitation to Miss Rimsha Shahid, a research analyst at SARIM, to deliver the concluding remarks for this webinar. Over to you, Rimsha.
Thank you so much, Heman, for inviting me. And now I would like to thank you all for joining us today for the webinar, A World of Equals, fulfilling the global goal of inclusive communities by empowering minorities, in observance of the United Nations International Day of Peace. We hope this event has been a source of inspiration and a call to action for all of us. In a world striving for peace and equality, it is imperative that we recognize the importance of empowering minorities and fostering inclusive communities. The discussions and insights shared today have shed light on the challenges faced by marginalized groups and the essential role we all play in creating a more just and equitable world. Our first speaker, Dr. Georgina Jardim, in her address highlighted the growing divisions within society, emphasizing that people are increasingly separated along various structural lines. She also underscored the central challenge we face today, which is how to effectively translate global objectives into localized actions with a primary focus on the overarching goal of inclusivity. Dr. Jardim also suggested that the key to achieving this lies in making these global goals tangible at the local level. One practical avenue she proposed to achieving this localization of goals is through the organizing of inclusive activities that bring communities together. For example, the activities like street festivals, exhibitions, and museums that showcase and celebrate the rich tapestry of diverse cultural and geographical heritages. Dr. Jardim firmly believed that these shared experiences have the potential to bridge divides and foster a sense of unity within communities. Dr. Jardim also stressed the importance of narratives in shaping the mindset of community. She also acknowledged that narratives wield a significant influence capable of either nurturing an inclusive community spirit or perpetuating exclusionary tendencies against minority groups. Hence, she urged a thoughtful and deliberate narrative shift that promotes inclusivity and equality at its core. Moving ahead, in her compelling presentation, presented by our second speaker, Ms. Reeta Pariyar, she delivered a powerful message about the importance of taking action within our own spheres of influence to bring about meaningful change. She highlighted that these localized efforts are the building blocks toward the eventual achievement of equality on a broader scale. Ms. Pariyar directed our attention to the pressing issue of casteism that is deeply rooted in Nepal and which still persists for generations. Within this context, she shed light on the deeply troubling consequences faced by marginalized communities who endure the scourge of untouchability and experience the systematic denial of their most basic rights. These essential rights include access to quality education, fair employment opportunities, representation in the political landscape, and also the opportunities within the bureaucratic setup. Her words resonated with the audience as she underscored the urgency to addressing these systematic inequalities and promoting social justice. Through her speech, Ms. Reeta Pariyar encouraged listeners to recognize their own roles in creating a more equitable world, starting with the initiatives and actions within their immediate surroundings, for sure. Moving ahead towards our last speaker, Mr. Anubhav Singh, who emphasized the fundamental concept of equality and its intrinsic connection to the principles of democracy. He pointed out that regrettably the essence of democracy has come under scrutiny and faced challenges in India since 2014, as well as in several European and South American nations. Mr. Singh also urged for a transformation that conceals mere political democracy. He advocated for the evolution of political democracy into a more comprehensive social democracy. In a contemporary world heavily influenced by capitalism, he also highlighted the persistent disparities faced by certain societal classes. These disparities are primarily rooted in factors such as racial, religious, ethnic, or caste identities, which often result in these groups being left behind within the framework of globalization or a globalized world of today. So, yeah, as we conclude this webinar, let us carry forward the spirit of unity, empathy, and determination that the International Day of Peace represents. Each one of us has the power to make a difference, whether it's through small acts of kindness in our daily lives or by actively participating in initiatives that promote inclusivity and diversity. As we all are aware that creating a world of equals requires the collective efforts of individuals, communities, and nations. So, yes, together we can build a future where everyone, regardless of their background, religion, ethnicity, or caste, enjoys equal opportunities, rights, and dignity. So, thank you once again for being a part of this important conversation. Let's continue to work together to create a world where peace and inclusivity prevail. Wishing you all a peaceful and inclusive future. Thank you so much. Over to you, Heman.
Thank you, Rimsha, for your concluding remarks. I appreciate for taking your time out, Dr. Jardim, Anubhav Singh, and Reeta Pariyar, for sharing your invaluable insights with us today. Let's carry this message of equality, justice, and inclusivity in our hearts as we continue to strive for more inclusive society. As we part ways today, let us remember that promoting equality is not just a one-day event, but an ongoing journey that requires our collective efforts. SARIM remains committed to its cause, and we encourage all of you to stay connected with us as we continue to advocate for the rights of minorities in South Asia. Thank you and bye until we meet in our next webinar. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day. Let's work together for a brighter and more equitable future. Bye.